Christina gazed out the window of the old farmhouse. The steam from the warm kitchen had condensed on the cold window, and through it the countryside took on a shimmery and ethereal appearance. Feeling rested and happy, she smiled at nothing in particular. A month had passed since the Russian bombing of Tallinn, and the German occupation government, fearing more Russian raids, ordered all mothers and children to leave the city. Christina and her children joined the exodus to the surrounding country. Out in the farm community of Kairu, the peaceful spring days had their own soothing effect, and the quiet nights gave Christina needed rest. "Mammy," a small voice interrupted Christina's reverie. Vino, his blonde hair tousled from sleep, pattered into the kitchen with Lily in tow. "Good morning, my children," she greeted them cheerfully, and after a quick hug, continued preparing breakfast. Vino helped his sister into her chair and then walked to the stove. "Mammy," he questioned, "when is Pappy coming home?" "I don't know, son," his mother sighed. Victor's frequent absences remained a tangible link between their tranquil existence in Kairu and the reality of war. Not knowing how much longer he could do anything at all for the churches, he constantly traveled through Estonia, visiting congregations. His wife seldom heard from him during these trips, because he often returned home before his letters arrived. "I don't know," Christina repeated. She smiled fondly at the serious young face. "Eat your breakfast, then we'll take a walk in the woods." In Tallinn, Victor got off the train and started toward his church's headquarters office. The sun peered over the tops of half-demolished buildings and cast strange, irregular shadows on the streets. Its rays felt comfortably warm on his back as he entered the building. At his desk, he sorted through the stack of mail that had accumulated until an official-looking envelope caught his attention. Quickly, he tore it open, scanned the letter, and groaned inwardly. Another summons, this time from the German secret police. The brief note commanded him to appear at their headquarters to answer some complaints. Reluctantly, he pushed back his chair. He hoped it wouldn't take too long because he wanted to find a ride to Kairu that night. While he waited for the bus, he wondered why the authorities wanted to see him. The German government held a fairly liberal policy toward the churches, but in spite of their freedom, Victor had cautioned the ministers to speak carefully. Then he considered the possibility of their drafting him. No, that couldn't be the reason either. The Germans had excused him from military duty, had even given him a document classifying him as unabkömmlich, meaning that a person in his position could not be spared. While it hardly flattered him, he did appreciate the immunity such an official exemption offered. At the temporary government headquarters, he entered the secret police office. A German officer came in and motioned Victor to a chair facing his desk. "We've received reports that your ministers preach contrary to the beliefs of our government," he began, not unkindly. Victor started to speak, but the officer interrupted him. "You're preaching that the end of the world is coming and of a millennium." Puzzled, Victor nodded his assent. Why did that bother the Germans? "This millennium you describe is contrary to the millennium the Nazi regime fights to achieve," the officer scolded. "I must ask you to cease such preaching in your churches. All the different churches can exist only until we have won complete victory. Then there will be only one religion, the Nazi religion." With that, the Nazi dismissed him. The warning seemed anticlimactic to Victor. Disquieting news from the war zone told of Russian victories, and though Victor hoped, along with the rest of his countrymen, that Russia would not reoccupy Estonia, all signs pointed to a German defeat. Uncertainty filled the next few days and weeks. Many Estonians made plans to leave the country. Some left for Germany or Sweden. Others crossed the bay to Finland. Many fled the cities and went into hiding in the forests and isolated villages. On a warm June evening, Victor and Christina sat on the steps of the old farmhouse. Passing clouds snuffed out the stars flickering in the dark sky. But even the beauty of the night did little to ease the anxiety they felt. "The government now says all Estonians who want to flee can go to Germany," Victor said morosely. Probably they want as many workers for their factories as possible. I think it means they know retreat is inevitable. He folded his arms and leaned back against the railing. Last week, the local church governing committee voted to release any staff who wish to leave the country. Religious personnel have more to fear if the Russians return, Victor added ruefully. Several ministers left this week, and he named them. Do you think we should go too? Christina asked apprehensively. No, my work is here, and this is my homeland. Then he sobered at the thought of the possible consequences. If Russia does take over, they will consider me a collaborator with the Germans because I've been area church president during the German occupation. They could label me a traitor. His wife nodded and leaned over to pick a flower from the row of forget-me-nots growing beside the house. Most of all, I fear that if the Russians come back, they might separate our family, Victor continued. He shared with her a grim report he had recently heard. When the Russian authorities carried out that deportation, they put the children into railroad cars by themselves. For some reason, they pushed the cars onto a sidetrack and then forgot about them. When the children's plight became known, most of them were dead or dying. Christina gasped. Silently, they sat enveloped in their own thoughts. A gray flannel fog closed in the meadow and left a hushed, dark night. The solemn green of the summer forest gave way to the brilliant splash of September color. Sunlight played on the varied hues of red and gold. A frisky breeze stirred the stillness, and leaves sailed through the air in graceful swirls, landing with a whisper on the musk-covered forest floor. Kneeling by the kitchen stove, Christina poked the stubborn fire. The yawning red mouth swallowed one more stick of wood, and the flames shot up eagerly. Sighing, she sat back on her heels and brushed the hair from her flushed face. For a fleeting moment, she thought wistfully of the convenience of her Talon home. Then she stood up resolutely. I'd rather have the safety of our temporary country home, she mused, and punched her bread dough vigorously. Footsteps echoed down the long farmhouse hall. Quickly, Christina turned. Victor, she cried happily, pleased at his unexpected arrival. Seeing her husband's gray, tired face, joy evaporated just as quickly as it had come. Christina, he explained, the Russian armies are extremely close. Within a few days they may arrive in Talon. We can't delay our decision. We must leave now. Leave now? She echoed blankly. Where can we go? His silence admitted he didn't know either. Neither of them moved. Finally, she drew in a trembling breath and announced unsteadily, I'll call the children. You get the suitcases. We need to pack a few things at least. They hurried through the house, taking only what seemed absolutely necessary. Victor snapped the 2 suitcases shut as his wife came through the door. Here, she said, I've been drying bread for the last few days. It won't be very tasty, but we might need it if we can't buy food. He nodded, reached for a small suitcase, and deposited the bags of dried bread. There, he looked around at his family, we're ready. Christina nodded and brushed away tears. She reached for Laylee's hand and led the way to the porch. Victor pulled the heavy door shut and picked up the 2 suitcases. Momentarily, he paused, and his eyes met Christina's. An agonizing feeling of uncertainty and fear engulfed both husband and wife. He laid his suitcases down again, gathered his family around him, and together they knelt on the rough boards. The race for survival was on, and only God knew its destiny.